Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jews and Christians, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms you use to access your favorite podcasts. On this week's podcast, I have invited journalist Eduardo Vidal with Miami Independent to the podcast to discuss the current events in Israel and the biblical and historical significance of what is unfolding in America and Israel, Hispanic Latino community. I also want to remind you that it's important for you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. Eduardo, welcome to Proclaiming Justice.
To tell your audience, I am a semi-retired lawyer living in Doral, Florida. My family brought me from Cuba when I was 9 years old in 1966. So that means we're refugees from communism. We've had some experience with totalitarian atheism. And then I grew up in Chicago. I worked in Chicago as a lawyer briefly. Then I worked in New York. So I was working for a total of over 30 years. And then I took early retirement in the Sun Belt. I've continued working. I'm general counsel of an online media business. I'm also on boards of directors of startups as their legal counsel. But otherwise, I have a lot of time. And so I focused on a couple of areas. One is the Miami Independent. I'm a contributing editor, and there are several other people. The Miami Independent is one of a dozen publications. They're all digital publications that are put out by CD Media, Creative Destruction Media. Our CEO is Todd Wood. He's a Air Force Academy grad, flew helicopters for Special Forces, and then he worked as an investment banker. And he's been in journalism now for about 10 years. And this is a chain of newspapers that go from not only Miami, also Atlanta, Georgia, Westport, Connecticut, Manhattan, Colorado Springs. We have a strong armed forces network newspaper, digital newspapers all around. So we expect a seven-figure investment within the next month or so. So we're very strong. In Miami, we have a publication or 100,000 viewers monthly. And we aim our publication not only at the Miami metro area, but really at the whole state, because the state of Florida is a red state, and the state legislature has a Republican supermajority, but it is not a conservative supermajority. In fact, conservatives are in a minority in the state legislature, a small minority. So there's a real battle between the, we call them RINOs, Republicans in name only, establishment, and the conservative grassroots activists that want to see more of a conservative bent and an open, that's why, for example, the other thing I do is I'm the general counsel and one of the founders of the Election Integrity Brigade of Miami-Dade County. We find that election integrity is very important, starting in the Republican Party of Florida, which does not support election integrity, certainly not in its practices. So that's another one of the areas where we grassroots conservatives are in dispute with the Republican establishment.
Well, it's amazing because I was going through the website, just looking at some of the articles, the RINOs that you expose and cover. it's the Republican Party definitely has its challenges here in the state of Florida,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
but it's really happening everywhere. I mean, Texas, where I lived for a few years, they have a Republican majority legislature, but then their speaker was
Hmm.
elected with Democrat support, and the Democrats are like co-chairman of every committee. So it's really a nationwide problem. That there's a new MAGA movement that's taking over the Republican Party. It's led by President Trump, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of resistance and people that call themselves MAGA, but they really aren't. And
Hmm.
Florida and Texas are just a couple of the places where that's a problem.
That's a very good point. I have noticed that Texas it's almost like there's a coup attempt
Right.
going
Absolutely.
on,
Yep.
and it seems to be a response to President Trump. Ever since President Trump got elected, it's like some of these red state legislatures, even Tennessee, we're
Right.
seeing some pushback happening. But it
Yeah.
seems like these rhinos are coming out of the closet and they're digging in their heels and they are not going to give Trump his win on the
Right.
state level. So, yeah,
Well, we're fighting. We've won a big battle with getting Trump elected. His cabinet obviously is excellent,
mhm.
but the war continues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of the war against anti-Semitism
Mhm.
is raging as well. It's a huge problem across the country, really around the globe. We've been, exposing some of the anti-Semites and some of the activity going on here in the States with some of the leaders within the conservative movement.
Right.
But I wanted to talk to you because you are originally from Cuba,
Mhm.
and Proclaiming Justice to the Nations is in the process of producing our next award-winning documentary film that I have no doubt it's going to be an amazing film everybody's going to have to see, but it's called The Lost Jews of the Inquisition. And with the rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is not new to our generation. It goes back millennia, unfortunately. And the Inquisition was a horrific time in history where the Hispanic, Latino Jews from Spain and Portugal were directly targeted by the Catholic Church, by the inquisitors, testing the validity of their conversion from uh, Judaism to Christianity. And so you have a unique story, and the film, our documentary, is going to cover stories like yours.
Okay.
You come from a family that is from Cuba, that is of Jewish descent. Tell our audience a little bit about your background and how you found out that you were Jewish. Did you always know this, or was this something recently that you
No,
stumbled
no,
upon?
I didn't know it. When I was in high school, I grew up in the north side of Chicago, and I went to a Jesuit high school in the North Shore suburbs. And when we drove up in the school bus, we would drive by these synagogues in Skokie. Skokie has a big Jewish population.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't really know much about the Jews. I was 13 or 14, but there were these synagogues had big signs that said "Saved Soviet Jews." And having come from communism,
Mm,
I didn't know much about the Jews, but I thought if the Soviets were persecuting them, they couldn't be all bad. And
mm-hmm,
so I kept an open mind and I kept learning about the Jewish story. And it doesn't really, what happened was that here in America, the story of the Israelites leaving Egypt and
mm-hmm,
going to a new land is very similar to the story of immigrants coming to America, and
mm-hmm,
especially Latino immigrants who are leaving oppression in
mm-hmm,
places like Cuba, like Venezuela now, like Nicaragua, leaving lawlessness in Mexico, lawlessness and wokeness in Argentina and
mm-hmm,
Brazil. And so I think we sympathize with the Jewish position here in America today.
mm-hmm,
And for example, in my case, I was born in Cuba, and my four grandparents were born in Cuba. They all came to America, and it turns out that one of my grandparents, his last name was Capiro, Capiro, which is
mm-hmm,
clearly a Jewish name. And
mm-hmm.
a grandmother, her last name was Leyva, Leyva.
Oh, wow.
and her family was from the Canary Islands, and the Canary Islands is a place where a lot of Jewish people from Spain and Portugal would go to get away from the administrative state in Spain.
Mm.
So that's a giveaway that they were probably had some Jewish component to them. And when
Mhm.
you go back to the story of Spain, they were invaded in 7/11 by jihadists.
Mhm.
These were the same people that
Right.
conducted the raids on October 7th outside
Mhm.
of Gaza. They had come from they were led by Arabs from at that time the caliphate was based in Damascus,
Mhm.
and they recruited some North African Berbers and they raided Spain. At that time, Spain was a leftover from the breakdown of the Roman Empire. There
Mhm.
was a Visigoth Germanic kingdom that had run over and taken over. The Vandals had gone through a century before. And by the way, the last Visigoth king of Spain was Roderick.
Mm.
Roderick. And that's why there's so many Rodriguez's. and,
Oh.
and all the other names come from
Yeah.
somebody. Fernandez is Fernando, and so
Mhm.
those are the Castilian names. Castile is the land in the center of Spain. And over centuries, the Christians, with help from people coming from over the Pyrenees, drove back these jihadists. I know my family's from Barcelona. In 801,
Mhm.
Barcelona was liberated from the jihadist yoke by knights under Charlemagne, and they kept going. In 1085, there was a big breakthrough in Toledo, which is right in the center, was liberated by the Castilians,
Mhm.
and so on. In 1212, there was a big breakthrough, and all of Andalusia, the south of Spain,
Right.
was reconquered by the Christian armies, except for Granada, which was at the southeast corner, and that was conquered finally in 1492 by Queen Isabella of Castile and King
Mhm.
Ferdinand of Aragon, which includes Barcelona and Catalonia. So the problem there was that at the end of this crusade, and it really was a crusade and a reconquest, starting around 1380, the church in Castile set up the Spanish Inquisition, and it spread all over, including to Portugal. And unfortunately, in fighting the jihadists, they became somewhat like the jihadists.
Mm.
And that's a
Yeah.
real problem because before that,
Mhm.
the local Jews had fought together with the Christians against the jihadists.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, the Castilians, especially, were became very prejudiced and very suspicious, and really wrongly so. And I think that was a huge misfortune and a miscarriage of justice
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
the kings to have done that. But now
Mhm.
it turns out that some of their best subjects were Jewish or
Yeah.
other Jewish. Christopher
Mhm.
Columbus, with all respect to Italians, it turns out that he was a Jew from Valencia. His family
Mhm.
was in the textile business. Today you call them. They were in the garment trade.
Mhm.
They could have been on the west side in Manhattan. And so he and his brother moved to uh, Lisbon. And instead of being in a Valencia, which is facing the Mediterranean, they moved to a city that faced the Atlantic. And they got into sailing. And Christopher Columbus sailed on the Atlantic. And it's different from sailing in the Mediterranean where it's much more sheltered.
Mhm.
And so he had it was an act of faith to cross the Atlantic, to say, oh, well, our creator did not put us in a place that we could manage. And
Mhm.
that's what he was saying then. And he led these three little ships across the Atlantic. I think it was thought for many, from the antiquity that the earth was a globe. So
Mhm.
he didn't come up with a lot of new ideas. He implemented these ideas, but the
Mhm.
ideas had been there for people to borrow.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
understood that you not needed to sail south close to the equator to go west because the winds in the North Atlantic go clockwise. So
Mhm.
if you want to go west, you have to go south to the close to the equator, and then that'll take you west. And that's what he did. He didn't go down far enough. He stopped in the Canary Islands. He should have stopped in the Cape Verde Islands, which are further south, but they were held by the Portuguese, and he thought they might shoot at him. So he came in high. He came in at Barbados, north, and then he went from there to Cuba. In his second voyage, he went further south and he hit the South American continent.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he explored Venezuela. But
Right. Right.
but I would say the Latino American community generally is very supportive of Israel, and especially see a lot of Latinos who have come to America have stopped being Roman Catholic, and we've gone to the evangelical and the
Mm-hmm.
Protestant churches, and those churches, if they're properly run, are very, very much pro Israel.
Yes.
You
Mm-hmm.
can't be reading the Bible and seeing your story, and it's all Jews. You cannot be anti-Israel if you're going to be a Christian. You're going to read the Old Testament. It's 80% of the Bible. So
Mm-hmm.
we disagree on the resurrection, but we agree on everything else. And
Yeah.
I think that that's enough. Ronald Reagan used to say that if you agree with somebody on 80%, uh, he was not
Yeah.
your enemy. He was
Take it.
potential ally. So, no, I think there's a lot of support for Israel and really opposition for the jihadists. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how can you support? I look at all these
Right.
campuses. My wife and I are from the University of Chicago. We are very fairly active alumni, and how can that's there's not a lot of anti-Semitism that we've seen, but how can you be supporting
Right.
these jihadists who carried out a pogrom
Mm-hmm.
outside of Gaza on October 7,
Mm-hmm.
2023. How can you support them? And yet, the Black Lives Matter in Chicago put out a poster, which I used for one of my articles, and it's a poster of one of the paragliders
Mm-hmm.
with a Palestinian flag
It's
that
disgusting.
attacked the
Mm-hmm.
Israelis, and the Black Lives Matter says, "I stand with Palestine."
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Mm-hmm.
we don't. The Latino community does not stand with Palestine. In fact, when you look at the jihadists today, they're worse than the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
The Nazis, in their attacks on the Jews, they did not use their regular army for the most part, the Wehrmacht.
Mm-hmm.
They used these special task forces. They call them Einsatzgruppen.
Mm-hmm.
My German is not very good. But anyway, these special task forces, and then they use local allies, local auxiliaries, local collaborators. And so these task forces had huge morale problems. They had their alcoholism, and
Mm-hmm.
because they knew they were doing something bad, their consciences hurt them.
Oh yeah.
If you look at the jihadists, they
They
brag
have no
about
conscience.
killing. They
That's
have no
right.
conscience. That they have no conscience. They videotape themselves. They have their
They're
cell phones to
monsters.
show what killing Jews. They show it off to their parents.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really we talk about free Palestine. I think Palestine
Mm-hmm.
needs to be freed from the
Mm-hmm.
jihadist yoke,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Absolutely.
that they're the ones that are holding Palestine back. And then you hear about the two-state solution. That doesn't work.
Yeah. No.
Gaza has been a Jew, an Israel or an Islamic state since
Mm-hmm.
2005, and look at
Mm-hmm.
what they've done.
Yep.
You cannot have two states when one state is being run by a suicide cult,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what
That's
you
right.
have in Gaza. In fact, I think Donald Trump's idea of resettling all those people is really the right way.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of space in Arab and Muslim countries for these 2 million Gazans to live, to transfer
That's
to,
that's
and maybe
correct.
they can start a new life and do
Mm-hmm.
something else, and
Mm-hmm.
not because where they are, it's like the jihadists want this grudge to fester.
Mm-hmm.
They want the
Yeah.
grievance to fester and not to be dispersed. Heck, in 1948, all the Jews were kicked out of the Middle East
Mm-hmm.
and North Africa, and
Mm-hmm.
they all had to go back, to Israel. You look at,
Right.
even Morocco, Iraq. There used to be big Jewish community. Iran,
Yeah.
and they had in 1948 they were all kicked out. So there's hardly any Jews now in Morocco where there was a community. Um, and so I think it's the right thing to clean out Gaza. Now I'm not sure that I want Trump to be building the Trump Tower in Gaza or whatever, but or somebody will. Maybe his son-in-law will do it, or his advisor Witkoff. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea that you can't have a two-state solution, it doesn't work. And then if you look at who is causing all this terrorism against Israel, it's not so much the Arabs, because I think it's not really Arab driven. It's driven by the Iranians,
That's
and
right.
they're different from the Arabs. They're Persian. They
Mhm.
were conquered by the jihadists in the 7th century, but they're Persians. They don't have that any affinity. They're not Semitic like the Arabs and the Jews. And that's why Trump and his son-in-law were able to reach these Abraham Accords.
Mhm.
The idea
Mhm.
that the Arabs are the sons of Ishmael, in a sense. And so they could do business with the Jews, but the Persians cannot. And I
Mhm.
think that's why the anti Semitic elements of the Democrat Party have, since 2009, supported the Iranian mullahs
Mhm.
against Israel. And you can see it. Obama opened the spigots to give them money and
Yes.
cash. Then
Mhm.
Trump came in and cut them off. Then I call it the Obama Biden 3.0 administration, they
Mhm.
opened the spigots again. You
Yep.
know, Iran was bankrupt when Trump was finished with his first term. It was the Obama Biden 3.0 administration that let him get all
Mhm.
this extra
Mhm.
money, which they're using for terrorism.
Mhm.
That's what they do.
Yep.
So, you know, that's why it's the real problem starts with Iran, and I think we're going to have to do something about their nuclear program. You can't cut a deal with them because they're totally obsessed with hatred and death to Israel
Right.
and death to America too.
Mhm.
So I think we have to take a very strong stand against Iran in the Middle East and supporting our ally Israel.
Mhm. Mhm.
But let me ask you
Absolutely.
something. Why do Jews vote Democrat?
That's a question that I can't answer. Only what I've been told is that because of years past,
Right.
centuries past, what's happened to the Jews by Christians,
By
they've always
Christians. What
been
Christians?
the the
Do you
last
think
two.
the Holocaust was created done by Christians?
Well, not Hitler, but he used the Christians because he had a
Yeah,
lot of
the
Christian
Christians just
followers.
the
That
Christians just didn't fight. I
Yep,
agree.
they did not.
That,
They
that's the
turned a
whole
blind
story
eye.
of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was the only
That's right.
Lutheran pastor who really stood against Hitler. There were very few
Hmm.
people. I
Hmm.
agree. So,
Well,
but what is that? But wait. But how does that translate to the Democrats in America?
I don't understand. I know Democrats who do not support the Democrat Party any longer because of the policies against Israel.
Have they
So
stopped
I'm
voting
seeing
Democrat?
several of them have stopped voting Democrat, but not
Oh,
a
two
lot
or
of
three of
them.
them.
Yeah, no.
I think that's a real issue. Something like 60% of Jews voted for Kamala Harris,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
I think that's something that the Jewish community needs to examine.
Absolutely, absolutely. So speaking of the Jewish community,
Yep.
let's let's change the conversation just slightly. So you were born in Cuba,
Right.
and tell us about your journey in finding out about your Jewish ancestry, because we're seeing a lot of Hispanic Latinos now who are
Mhm.
coming out. They were raised Catholic. Some of them, like you said, are in the Protestant faith, um, of the evangelical persuasion,
Right.
and they are finding out about their Jewish ancestry. They've always had this love and affinity. Tell us your story. How did you find out about your
Well,
being Jewish, your
I
family
can tell you
lineage?
that in Cuba, and my grandparents had no idea that they were Jewish. None.
Wow.
So we came here when I was 9, and we went to Chicago. We settled in Chicago, and I think over time they realized, the Capiro is a very Jewish name, but
Right.
he wouldn't have thought of it. And so it did it never he had been Catholics for his whole life, and
Mhm.
everybody that he knew, his family had been Catholic.
Mhm.
So it was not like a recent conversion to
Mhm.
Catholicism.
Mhm.
And I just kept I was the one who realized what was going on, but while my grandfather was alive, I never really talked to him about it. And we just continued being Christian. We're happy being Christians. We think
Mhm.
Christians have it right. So well,
Yeah.
we like Christ. We like Jesus. But no, I think most people, the conversion happened so long ago
Mhm.
that the only recent Jews is that during the late 30s, there were some Jewish from Poland who were able to go to Havana.
Mhm.
and get away from Hitler, and then eventually they made their way into the U.S.
Mhm.
So there
Mhm.
were some, but those were the only Jews that we would know in Cuba or in the Latin community.
Mhm.
I think that that conversion happened so long ago that people don't even realize that they were Jewish. It's not like people are saying, "Oh, I was Jewish until, I was 3 or 5 or 10." No,
Mhm.
it just happened so long ago. It was 1492,
Right.
and
Mhm.
Christopher Columbus, hid that part. I
Mhm.
think he said that he was Italian or something,
Mhm.
and I think nobody else has really paid attention to it
Right.
until now. All of a sudden, we come to the U.S. and we realize that we might be Jewish. In Latin America, there is a big Jewish community in Argentina. Argentina has a lot of European immigrants from all over. So there's a big Jewish community. I don't think there's a lot of anti-Semitism, but in some places there is. I know in Venezuela there was some
Mhm.
anti-Semitism and some
Right.
other places. But I don't think it. There's just nobody's not Catholic. In
Mhm.
fact, in Latin America, if anything, the Protestant churches have been growing, and especially, for example, in Brazil.
Mhm.
And I think that's the real challenge to the Roman Catholic
Mhm.
hierarchy.
Mhm.
Of course, now we have a Latin American Pope who is a communist, so that doesn't attract Hispanics here in the U.S. He has a lot of criticism from the Latino community in
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
So no, I think it happened so long ago
Right.
that nobody's really remembering it.
Yeah, but see, my great grandfather on his deathbed, my
Mhm.
parents who were children at the time, and my grandparents
Right,
were called to my great grandfather's bedside on his deathbed, and
right.
he told them that he could not leave this earth without telling them that we're Jewish. So they had for generations, this was the tradition. The last patriarch or matriarch alive would tell the next generation that they
All
were
right. So,
Jewish. So
so let me ask you two questions. Where did this happen? What country?
this happened here in South Florida. They came over from Portugal, from
Oh, okay. They
Azores.
came from Portugal to Florida.
Uh-huh.
And did they marry Jewish people all along?
They married within, for several generations, they married within 5 families.
Hmm.
They
Yeah,
wouldn't allow their children to, and this is generations back, they wouldn't
right,
allow their children to marry anyone else. They only married within these family lines because they knew these families were Jewish.
right.
They
No,
were Zionists.
I have not heard of that in Latin America, in Cuba or in
Mhm,
Venezuela or in Argentina. Maybe in
mhm,
Argentina because they have a really big, big Jewish community. In Mexico, for example, the current president is Jewish, although she's
mhm,
a practicing pagan.
mhm.
But she comes from a Jewish family. This was Jewish communists from they're the ones who sheltered Trotsky.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Okay, and
Yeah.
you go back. Trotsky got there in the 1920s, and so there was a strong communist Jewish community in Mexico since the 1920s.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, and this is nothing to be proud of. These are bad people,
Yeah.
and their current president is really anti Judeo-Christian.
Mm, mm.
She's a bad person.
Interesting.
Absolutely, but
That's too
she's
bad.
Jewish.
Mm,
She comes from a Jewish community. This is a
mhm.
community that um, sheltered Trotsky when he got kicked out of the Soviet Union in the 1920s. And
Yeah.
the ruling party in Mexico that won the Mexican Revolution Civil War that started in 1910, they won by 1917. They were a semi-communist party, the PRI. They they really were anti-Christian. They launched
Mhm,
it was partly anti-Christian crusade, but it was also they wanted to expropriate small farmers north of Mexico City.
mm,
This had always been a rougher area because the problem in Mexico is that if you go north of Mexico very far, you get into very arid land, and it's not that great for farming, and there's a lot of hostile Indians.
mm.
So it was always they always had rough settlers, and a lot of Jewish settlers would go up there in the north because just to get away from Mexico. For example, Monterrey, Mexico was founded. A lot of the industrial plants there were founded by Jewish families from Mexico City who wanted to get away from the bureaucracy.
Mhm,
Names
mhm,
like Garza, Sada, and so on are definitely Sephardic.
mhm.
And no, that's again, I think that's kind of been. Um, I think it's been a long time, so I'm not sure people are actively Jewish anymore. Like you said,
Right.
families,
Mhm,
but definitely the current president of Mexico comes from a Jewish family. I don't know how long
mhm,
they've been in Mexico. A
mhm,
lot of if you look at the industrialists in Monterrey, northern Mexico,
mhm,
they were Jewish, and for example, a lot of the settlers all the way up to San Antonio,
mhm.
they were also Jewish, Sephardic, kind of fake, semi-Christian.
Right, right.
So you'll see that. But what you're talking about in South Florida is really unusual to have
Mhm,
five. I don't think you don't see that in Latin America, except maybe in in um, in Argentina, where
mhm,
they have the biggest community in Latin America of Jews,
mhm.
and I think they're still active. That's where they caught Eichmann.
Right. I
And
know. That's why when you say there's a large Jewish population in Argentina, I'm thinking,
yes,
oh my gosh, that's where the Nazis went.
right. That is also true.
Unless,
Yes,
and
unfortunately,
I don't know if everybody, agrees with me on whether Hitler still was able to survive, but
no, no,
it's believed that's where he went.
no. Well,
Argentina.
if he went anywhere, that would have been where he went, but I don't think he survived. But
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
Well,
that's that's very rare. I, I think there's a lot of it. There's some anti-Semitism because the Roman Catholic Church in Latin America is really, in many respects, anti-business. And Jews are usually prominent businessmen, and that's where a lot of the problem comes. It was true in Spain
interesting.
too. Anti-commercial. The Castilians were soldiers and
Hmm.
priests. They were
Hmm.
not businessmen, and that really held back Spain.
Hmm.
Uh, despite all these discoveries, they really were not able to exploit and make the most of all the discoveries because the ethic of the Castilians was more they produced soldiers and priests,
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
not businessmen, not lawyers necessarily,
Hmm.
business
Yeah.
lawyers, it's a rule of law. So, but what you're talking about in South Florida, Jewish family, that's very unusual, and I don't think it would have happened in many places in Latin America. But
Hmm.
do you realize that the first Jewish, or the second Jewish, Brandeis was the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. Cardozo was the second Jewish Supreme Court justice. He was a Hispanic.
Yes,
His family
absolutely.
came
He
from either, yeah, probably from Spain with a Z. If it was from Portugal, it would have had an S. But yeah, he was Hispanic. So what's her name? That
yes.
that
Well,
lady is the current Supreme Court justice is only the second Hispanic,
mhm.
Sonia
Right.
Sotomayor.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, Cardozo is definitely his from a Sephardic family. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, his side of the family left Portugal and went to the Netherlands,
Okay.
and they stayed there for a while, and then they came across to New York,
Sure.
and that's how he ended up in New York City.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. Peter
it's
Stuyvesant, governor, wrote back to the Dutch East West India
yeah.
Company and said, "What do I do with all these Jews?" And they told him to settle down and let him live there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, George Washington had a best friend, Haim Solomon, who
Okay.
was a wealthy Jewish banker. He bankrolled the American Revolution,
Good.
and he died without a dime to his name. He made an amazing contribution to our country, to which
Good.
we are forever grateful.
Hmm.
But this has been an interesting conversation, and I hope that we will have more opportunities to get together and talk because you cover the spectrum of what I'm interested in with
Okay.
the
I'm happy to
politics,
do it.
the rhinos. So, Eduardo, in closing, are there any final comments you would like to share with our audience and what Christians can do, how they can follow you, learn more about your work?
Okay, sure. I think the best place is to go to Miami Independent, and you'll see that I'm one of the contributing editors. And we cover all these areas, especially there's a real battle going on for the Republican Party, and in Republican states like Florida, like Texas, the Democrats don't really count. the battles are fought in the primaries and within the Republican Party. And
Right.
there's a real battle going on right now between the RINOs and the MAGA. And it's burning in both those states, and I'm sure it's burning in many other states. And it's not enough. It's, winning the presidency is essential, but there's more work to be done. And I urge you to go to miamiindependent.com and you'll see the coverage.
I am looking forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found this program informative and enlightening. This is a conversation that must happen. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. As a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Please share and like the podcast to help sound the alarm in your community. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs like this for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines. But we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.